This is on the central and southern planning area, and I think Mr. Smith has our review on this one.
Notice our scout troop from my ward is here, and I apologize to them. They listened to me on Sunday, some of them, and now they have to hear me drone on in here.
Now you're going to see him in action. Welcome, guys.
I apologize for that.
Thanks for coming.
This is the general plan amendment that was talked about in February and before that. And I thought what I'd do is go through a timeline of the meetings that we've had and the main events that have happened, because this thing started in July of 2017. And when it was submitted, the application was submitted for a rezone from A20 to RA5. So then in October, on October 12th, we took the rezone proposal to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission voted 3-2 to forward it. Actually, it was a 3-2 vote, which meant that there was no quorum. So it moved the no vote up to the council. The council met on October 18th of 2017 to discuss the rezone. And they continued it indefinitely with the following guidance. Members of the County Council wanted to ensure that if a rezone to RA5 is approved, that the property could be moved from the central to the southern planning area. They wanted to have the Attorney's Office determine whether a rezone application by itself allows the County Council to also make an adjustment to the planning areas as identified in the general plan, or if a general plan application would have to be submitted. Remember, the application was only for a rezone. And the third thing they wanted to have done was the planning staff was asked to look at whether a physical boundary could be established between the two planning areas. In the county, we have 13 planning areas. There's Walsburg, there's Eastern County, there's South Hills, there's Central, there's Jordanelle, Strawberry, all these planning areas, and for the most part, they have a geographical boundary. Walsburg is Walsburg. And other areas like the North Village has Highway 40 and the Ridgeline. The central planning area and the southern planning area really don't have a definite boundary. And so what they wanted us to do was look at whether we could establish a definite boundary. So that came on October 31st, 2017, the County Attorney's Office provided an opinion letter that both the notice and procedural requirements for a general plan map amendment had not been met. In order to amend the general plan, the applicant should submit an application for a general plan amendment. On November 6, 2017, the application for the general plan amendment was submitted to the planning office to change the property from central planning area to southern planning area. On December 14, 2017, both the rezone and general plan amendment proposals were continued by the Planning Commission to allow staff to update noticing language and send out a courtesy notice or letter to the adjacent property owners whose properties would be impacted by a county recommended change to the planning area they're in. So these were the properties that were on the north side of 650 South. We sent letters to them saying, hey, we're looking at changing you from the southern planning area to the central planning area. December, let's see, January 11th, both rezone and general plan amendment proposals are presented to the Planning Commission and forwarded to the Council with a 4-2 vote. January 17, 2018.
4-2 in favor?
4-2 in favor, yes. January 17, 2018, rezone and general plan amendments are presented to the County Council. Motion made to close public hearing on both items and approve the boundary change and continue to the February 7th for the general plan ordinance language and not address the rezone until the general plan language was approved. And then on February 7th, 2018, due to the referendum, the application for both items were continued indefinitely. So that's what's gotten us here today. These are the motions from the meetings. On January 17, 2018, the general plan motion stated, Councilman Steve Farrell made a motion that we go ahead and grant the boundary change and amend the general plan to put a finite boundary description in it, separating the central from the southern planning area, and approve this request with all the conclusions and findings of the Wasatch County Planning Commission. Councilman Crittenden seconded the motion with the clarification: if this is passed, then the next step is to do the ordinance, which will make the actual change in the general plan, and the motion carries with the following vote. So 4 in favor, 2 opposed. Then the next item was the rezone, which Councilmember Crittenden made a motion that we continue this rezone until such time as we complete the ordinance to see how it is written, which has been affected by passing the last item in changing the southern area, and continue this matter to February 7, 2018 on the 4 p.m. agenda. Councilman Spencer Park seconded the motion, and the motion carried with the following vote. Riley Probst, the applicant, then asked the Wasatch County Council and indicated that you are not going to approve the rezone until the ordinance is approved, and then this doesn't need to be renoticed. And then I stated that the public hearing has been closed. This matter would be on another agenda at 4 p.m. and notice does not have to be sent. Now that's with the understanding that it was continued to a date certain of February 7th, 2018. So on February 7th, this is after we received the referendum application, Chairman Greg McPhie indicated that because of the referendum application that has been mentioned, the Wasatch County Attorney's Office has indicated that the Wasatch County Council should continue this matter until such time as we know how to proceed. And then Councilmember Farrell made the motion. So that's where we're at. The general plan boundary change, putting the Probst property into the southern planning area, has been approved. The public hearing portion of it has been closed, and the intent was that this come back and we discuss the language for the ordinance and what that language that would then be put into the general plan would be. And so that's what we have here for you today. So the existing land use, or the land use that was previously on the property, was central planning area. And that boundary, with that boundary change, it was brought into the southern planning area, and it's 20.50 acres. You can see the property there. This is still the old boundary. That purple boundary there is the central planning area. And I'll show in a minute how that's been changed. This is the southern planning area, and the boundary in purple. So the direction from the county council was to establish 650 north. You can see that in that yellow dotted line. I'm sorry, 650 south as the boundary between the central planning area and the southern planning area. So everything to the north of that boundary would be central planning area. Everything to the south of that would be southern planning area.
So, Doug, how many acres went back in, came out of the southern and went back into the central?
Well, I should have looked that up, but I couldn't.
No problem. It's more than we took the other way, I guess, is what I'm getting at, what I'm trying to.
I've got a graph
that
that
fair
shows this boundary. It's changed to here.
Yeah.
These two properties come out of the southern planning area into the central. Yep.
And we did renotice, correct?
We did.
This meeting.
We did renotice, yes. So this map shows those two parcels that were changed from southern to central planning area. And it also shows the new boundary of the southern planning area that would now come out here around. This is the Probst property. Here you've got Southfield Road, 113 up here. So the boundary now comes out 650 south, around the Probst property, and back like this. What we decided is that the 650 South Road would become the boundary between the two planning areas, but we would not include these properties into the southern planning area unless or until they applied to have their property come in. So it was just the Probst property that came over. It was changed.
So to clarify that, the boundary line was changed to 650 south, but those other properties are still in the central, and they won't come out.
So all that boundary did is said, we don't want to entertain anything north of 650 south for the southern planning area. But these properties would have to apply to come into the southern planning area.
Okay.
So this is the ordinance language, and I apologize, this has changed. You have updated copies in front of you. Our attorney's office has added language to make it more deliberate, and I've actually added language as well. Every time I read something, I think of new things to put in it. So my whole intent with this was to have future legislative bodies understand that this was a very deliberate decision on your part, and that 650 South was that boundary line. So let me go through these items that I've added in here. So this is the proposed change to the general plan element of the central planning area. And the same language would be reflected in the southern planning area of the general plan. So for anybody to come in and want to amend or go further north of 650 South, they'd have to amend both sections. Does that make sense? The southern and central sections of the code. So what I stated is 650 South is the physical boundary between the higher constrained lands in the central planning area and areas that have less constraints to development south of 650 South in the southern planning area. The central planning area is highly valued by residents of the county and also has high constraints to development. The intent of the legislative body adopting this language was to establish a physical boundary and maintain 20-acre minimum zoning north of 650 South. Due to this intentional action by the legislative body, the southern planning area's boundary is limited to 650 South and east of the Spring Creek Channel. Maps 26 and 27 of the general plan identify these constraints. Other language in the general plan and the land use code in the southern and central planning areas support maintaining this boundary. The language adopted in the original general plan from 2001 that remains in the current plan and in regulations for the 820 zone shows the priority of a number of legislative bodies throughout the years to maintain the central planning area in its existing land use and development practices. They include, as a matter of public policy, the central planning area is to be maintained in its historical land use pattern of open meadows and river and small stream riparian habitat. The use of this area for housing and other types of development is discouraged due to the physical constraints and the higher costs of providing governmental services. This area's scenic value contributes significantly to the real value of all land within the Heber Valley area. The preservation of open space in the central planning area will also provide a desired greenbelt separation between Heber City and Midway. The development code should ensure that any development along SR 113 is set well back from the road and the rural character along this road is maintained. Avoid excessive costs for public services in areas with high physical constraints. Preserve the beauty of the entry corridors of Wasatch County. Preserve the beauty of the entry corridor. Oh, that's a. I put it twice. It's good to be redundant sometimes, right? Maintain an open buffer, rural buffer between Heber and Midway City. And as I mentioned, the section for the southern planning area is verbatim the same.
Even repeated it twice in the other one.
Oh, yeah. That's all I've got for the general plan amendments. Are there any questions for me?
Anything further for Doug?
So there's language a couple of times, and you mentioned that 650 South is the physical boundary, but it isn't. That seems very inconsistent to me. I just maybe let you talk about that a little bit more.
When you say 650 is the physical boundary, but
Well, if you put the map back up, it goes to 650, but then it stops. It doesn't go to the creek like the language says that it's going to.
Well, I guess what we're saying is 650 South is the boundary that we would allow the southern planning area to go to. But we're not proactively approaching those property owners and saying, you need to come into the southern planning area. So,
And maybe I didn't understand. It sounded like the language from the Planning Commission was to use 650 of the creek as the intersection, as the boundary.
it is at Spring Creek. Yeah, did I not mention that?
No, you did, but that's not what we're doing.
So I guess what you're saying is if we were going to follow this up to 650 South, we would take all those properties in up to 650 South.
Because one of the main reasons it sounded like was one of the main reasons we're doing this is to form a boundary. But we're describing a boundary, but we're not using that boundary, we're using prior.
Well, I think, and we discussed this at length in previous meetings, I can't recall if it was Planning Commission or Council, but we felt like until those other property owners, and they may never, I mean, some of those are developed with large homes on them, until they came in and approached the county to annex into the southern planning area, they're still in the central planning area.
Even though the line
It would
is.
give them, it would require them to go through more public process to make it anything other than what it already is, like we've done here.
But with
Not
this
really.
boundary at 650 South, that wouldn't be an impediment to them. They could do that if
Right.
you approved it.
But they would have to come in and go through all the same processes we've gone through.
Right.
Any
question?
So when you sent out notices over the past, since July, for the public hearings, did you receive any written comments or anything back from affected property owners in that area?
It's been too long. I think we did. I couldn't tell you how many and who.
Okay. And the other thought would be, here tonight, just by the show of hands, who here owns property in the area that's being discussed?
Well, which portion of the area?
Well, anything south of 650 South. Okay, so we have a handful over here. 3? Okay, just curious, just want to find out who we're talking to tonight.
Well, we're talking to everybody tonight.
We are.
Okay.
Okay. Anything further on that from the council? Okay. Yeah, we'll get, so before us tonight is ordinance number. This new language it's 1801. We've already voted on the boundary change, but this is to codify it. Correct? The ordinance would require a reading, typically more than one reading. And where we've changed the language as recently as today, I would assume this is going to be considered our first reading. Is that legally, am I on the right page?
You know, for zone changes and that, because there's a planning commission component, the 2 readings are considered planning commission in this
Oh,
council.
okay. All right. Well, I think it's up to us, though, we can make that decision based on our...
To go to another
opinions,
reading,
correct? Or our
absolutely,
discretion?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Another quick question. Doug, can you go back to the map that shows the line in the sand on 650? Yes, that one would be fine. So the old boundary where it was proposed to move to 650, the question was asked to me today by someone that wanted to find out, why was the old boundary going through all the different properties the way that it was? Was it because of wetlands or anything like that?
I think what they did is let me go to another map. I think what they did is, you're right, they took some of the constraints and said, we feel like here's the line that we draw, and there's constraints on one side, there's, and that's kind of how it is. I wasn't here when it was drawn. These were probably done in 2000, 99, 2000.
But there are no designated wetlands on this subject property,
If
correct?
you look at the map, there's designated wetlands right there. That's what it's showing, isn't it?
Doug, are there any designated wetlands on this property?
Not that I know of. Now,
But they
these
haven't been
maps
designated.
are from the National Wetland Inventory from Fish and Wildlife Service. They do a very high-level map at a 30,000-foot view and say, here's where there's potential wetlands. Now, any development that comes in and we've got some potential wetlands on it, we'll say, you need to do a wetlands inventory. And they'll have a consultant go out and come back and say either there is or there is not. And we might probably pass that by the Army Corps of Engineers to see if they agree or disagree.
What agency did you say did the map?
Fish and Wildlife Service.
So is this map not accurate then? Or, I mean, it's the bottom corner there that's being changed, that's showing a wetland on this map. Is this map inaccurate, or is there different designations?
Well, these are general plan maps, and general plan maps are general. That's the whole purpose of the general plan, to have a general idea. But it's at a 30-foot level, 30,000-foot level, where they're saying there could be wetlands in here. I've seen the property. I really don't. There's no wetlands on it. So.
Thank you. Okay.
Could I add a point?
Please.
This is from the state code, Utah State Code. This is 1727A 520, wetlands. A county may not designate or treat any land as wetlands unless the United States Army Corps of Engineers or other agency of the federal government has designated the land as wetlands.
Which they haven't here,
Okay.
I might also mention, you asked on your question on this, when we redid the general plan, when we had those committees back in, when was that? It's been
2005.
2005. I chaired the committee that looked at central and southern. At that time, there was a recommendation made by that committee to rezone some of this property to RA5, or RA. There was some of this was changed then, based on that. And the recommendation also of that committee was to change the North Fields to RA10, which obviously we didn't do it back then. But that was the recommendation of that committee back then in 2005.
So,
But some of these pieces were changed to RA5 after that study in 2005, based on that committee recommendation. So that maybe squirreled the line around a little bit too.
Okay, anything further for Doug? If not, we'll come to the council and look for some action here. On item number 1, ordinance number 18-01.
Can you make a question? Can we ask any public comments?
We've had 4 public, I meant to tell you, Ms. Crittenden, we have received your letter in written form after the public hearings were closed, and we've made those part of the record. Our attorney has those, and we've made that part of the record as well.
I appreciate that. I would actually like to change your language there just for a minute. It's not my letter. There were 7 other people signing on that.
Excuse me. It was submitted in your name. I apologize. I got to be emailed under your name. So.
Oh, well, yeah.
As the sponsor of the letter.
There are 7 other people who signed that letter who have great interest in this.
No offense. I was just merely stating I received it with your name on the top. So.
Okay. Can we have any kind of public comment on this today?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
go up to the,
Please. Rick's not here. If you could please, just so we've got
No problem.
ample recording.
One of my biggest concerns about this is that one of the most common comments in the code that I have read is the public interest on this issue. The people have already stated in a very powerful statement, in my opinion, at 74%, that they want the zoning to stay the same as the general plan is already stated. By changing and amending a boundary in the general plan, you're not listening to the voice of the people. And as representatives of those people, being how our government is run with the republic, you're representing the people. That wasn't something you had to even go out and seek, was the comment. You got it in a vote at 74%. It's not very often very many votes go at 74%. That was a very loud voice of what the people in this community would like. I think we've got a fairly good showing here of helping you understand that people, again, are very concerned about this issue. I would hope you would reconsider this and thinking about how you want to go forward. I appreciate that you have addressed the concerns that the 8 of us had signed that letter for. I wish you would maybe address those right now and try to help us understand what that is. If the attorney would please help us understand, since he is the one who is supposed to have answered that to us, because we have received nothing in writing as to help us understand this before this meeting as to why this is going forward.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, Ms. Crittenden.
Yes.
The letter that you handed me, and when I passed it on to everybody in council through email, I'm not in the habit of defending Greg on anything, but I did address the council and say this letter came from Marilyn Crittenden. That's why.
Certainly no offense intended. That was my fault.
That's perfectly fine, but all of those names are on there, you should be
We
able to
see
see
those,
that.
sorry. We see those,
But
they are part of the
It
record.
was the way I worded it, Ms. Crittenden.
Okay, we'll come back to, yes, ma'am.
May I speak? Thank you.
Please.
My name is Trudy Simmons. I was also a signer of this letter. In case anyone is interested, I have some extra copies of it, if anyone would like to read the letter that we sent. If anyone else would like to have a copy of that. As a citizen, I find it disappointing that, as a member of the public, I participated in addressing the council on some issues that are of great concern to not only myself, but a lot of other people, and we received no response. All right, and our names and addresses were all on the letter, all of the people who signed it, and we received no response. That's the first point. The other point, as Marilyn said, I would also like to reiterate that, as we pointed out in the letter, as per section 16.03.01B of Title 16 of the County Code, the general plan may only be amended if the amendment is in the best interest of the residents of Wasatch County. In order to change the lands within the central planning area, the county must show either, 1, the proposed change in boundary meets the stated public interest goals currently set forth in the general plan relative to the central planning area, or 2, the public interest goals relative to the central planning area have changed, and the proposed boundary change meets those new goals. Neither the applicant, Ms. Probst, the County Planning Department, the County Planning Commission, or the County Council has demonstrated that moving the boundary of the central planning area to exclude Ms. Probst's 20.5-acre parcel is in the best interest of the residents of the county. In fact, not only did the County Planning Department not make a finding that redrawing the boundary of the central planning area was in the public interest, it specifically stated that it could find no criteria or language in the general plan that would suggest that moving the boundary would be either appropriate or inappropriate. A concern that I have on this matter is that one individual, Ms. Probst, has made a request which seems to have set in motion a very important issue that a lot of people are concerned about, and that the county council has paid very little attention to the concern of the public in this matter. And one must ask oneself, how does this one individual, what have they presented to view the council members as evidence that their request is in the best interest of the residents of Wasatch?